Okay, so 1st of January 1851, first year in the bag, the first of 70, and it's been an eventful year. It's been a promising start, I think. In terms of the events of the autumn 1850, or the autumn and sort of first part of the winter, I think we can say it's a mixed bag. Khurshid Pasha's relief force then landed successfully at Hodeida, landed at the anchorage, managed to lift the siege on a fort and defeated Yemeni insurgents, and then moved on to Sana'a. Now, before reaching Sana'a, the city fell to Yemeni tribesmen, and this resulted in a small loss of prestige, and also we lost one national morale point. It's probably worth very quickly just talking about national morale. National morale always averages out at 100. 100 is kind of optimal national morale. We start with slightly more than 100, 106. I think it was 107, and we lost one national morale point. National morale is gained in warfare through significant military victories, capturing important locations, and this sort of thing, and is lost on the basis of war weariness, losing in battles, and it can be variable. A small loss might incur, for example, one national morale point. A significant loss could result in 3 or 4, especially in naval battles. If we lose big capital ships, this can result in significant losses of national morale. Once national morale reaches about 70 to 75, this is critical mass during times of war, and this can result in serious civil disorder problems and ultimately revolution. So national morale is something that you keep an eye on. When at peace, national morale, even if you've been defeated in a war and you have 60 national morale or something like this, it begins to gradually climb and averages out at about 100. And as I say, we start off with slightly more than 100 national morale, which is good. So we took a national morale hit and a small amount of prestige, but we nevertheless defeated the Yemeni forces in Sana'a, retook the city back, and Khurshid Pasha's cavalry division is now sorted into Hadramut, where we defeated a Yemeni force there. The success of Khurshid Pasha's force, and also just the events of the autumn, have led me to reconsider Aden, or Yemen. My thinking is, now my intention of course was always that we don't become embroiled in a protracted conflict in the Arabian Peninsula. But when I go to our Ministry of Colonial Affairs and check on the sort of status of different regions, we can see that Hejaz is actually a protectorate. Now, Hejaz is a pretty volatile region, as is Libya. Libya is also a protectorate, so neither of these places are full colonies, but they are under kind of nominal control. Yemen, on the other hand, is just merely an influenced territory, and well, there was some kind of negative fallout from Khurshid Pasha's victory. It resulted in Yemeni tribes falling down, sort of southward, really, and this resulted in us losing our trade posts. They sort of fell back to the south of the country, to the coast, burned our trade posts, and I'm filled now with a bit of a sunk cost fallacy. These trade posts are quite expensive. I mean, they require private capital, but also manufactured goods. Furthermore, when we look at the commodities that are available in Yemen, it's a really lucrative place. You know, we've got 3 provinces that can produce coffee, and 3 in the west part of the country that produce opium. The east, cattle and dyes, is slightly less lucrative, but nevertheless, these are still desirable. For the short period of time that we had trade posts in both of these regions, I did notice a slight boost in terms of domestic market sales. Obviously, they're just trade posts, so these commodities are just kind of trickling in. It's not a guaranteed supply of them. But it did give me pause for thought. I'm now going to keep Khurshid Pasha for the foreseeable future in Yemen. Further to that, I'm actually going to reinforce him with a small force. So I've started building 2 marine brigades in Smyrna. Now, when I consider the cost of these brigades, I mean, obviously, the finances, it costs state revenue as opposed to private finance, but they're actually slightly cheaper than the trade posts that we lost in terms of the manufactured goods required to build them. And my thinking is that this is a really lucrative region for exploitation, but it is volatile and the locals are difficult. So it's going to be security first economic exploitation second, and it's not something that's going to be hugely expensive. Khurshid Pasha only has a cavalry division, and he's yielded really good results. I mean, he's sorted all the way from the coast and defeated Yemeni forces on 3 separate occasions, 3 separate battles. My plan is to move these, when they're completed being constructed and trained, my plan is to move these 2 marine brigades to Aden. We're going to build a harbour in Aden, a colonial fortress, and on that basis we then have the grounds for economic exploitation. We're going to resend merchants, and we're going to develop a trade post, and we're going to do that block by block, and Khurshid Pasha is going to conduct an anti-insurgency campaign to try and whittle these Yemeni forces down. Now, of course, we haven't managed to sort of completely destroy them. They tend to break off, but we tend to defeat them fairly comfortably. They have a slight numerical superiority over us. These 2 forces combined comprise about 7,000 to 8,000 men. They've lost a couple of thousand men, and I'm not sure what their capacity is to replace their losses. So my thinking is we can probably whittle them down in a protracted anti-insurgency campaign. Whilst they have a numerical superiority, we have a qualitatively superior force, of course. It has modern weapons, and it's effectively led as well by a general. So, but the plan is not to send these forces through Hejaz. Hejaz is relatively quiet and peaceful. It is a protectorate, but I don't want to do anything that might sort of result in a sudden insurgency in Hejaz. It's, as I say, it's a volatile and difficult region. So the plan is we'll use the harbour in Aqaba, and we'll use our riverine points to basically move our forces through the Red Sea. Riverine points then, riverine pull points reflect, if you like, the combined sort of factor of your various ports throughout the map. You can expand ports and build them. You can send them into large military ports and this kind of thing. The more ports you have and the bigger the ports, the more riverine points. And riverine points allow you to move forces along coastal areas, also in actual rivers, of course, for example, like the Euphrates. And it allows you to move small forces. As long as you're relatively close to the theatre, you can maybe do it in a few different sort of stops. We can move from Constantinople to Palestine, and then from Palestine we can move south to Aden. Larger forces that cannot be accommodated on the basis of riverine points are moved using actual military units. These are transports. So, for example, the transport capacity for this is 40, a factor of 40. That's basically what an army corps is. An army corps is about 30,000 men, and its weight is a factor of 40. So this transport fleet, or flotilla, or squadron, can move 1 army corps at a time. We would not be able to move an army corps using riverine points alone. So riverine points is basically requisitioning merchants and civilian shipping to move small forces. Large forces are moved using transport squadrons. But anyway, so that's my plan. The reason being is because we either basically make or break. I think that we either abandon this fortress, we abandon Sana'a, and we forget about any kind of economic exploitation of Aden, which would be a real shame because it's a particularly lucrative region. I mean, it's not quite on par with Dubai and Bahrain and Qatar. These aren't gems, but nevertheless, these are really, really nice, lucrative commodities. This is our only local access to coffee, really. And though we do have one region that can produce opium at home, which is Bursa, supplementing that with a constant flow of opium from trading stations would be a worthwhile exercise, I think. And all of these things, once we develop colonial fortresses and trading stations and we defend them and we build this area up economically, as I say, I mean, the economic exploitation will have to sort of follow military occupation, basically using sort of relatively small but effective forces. One of the great things about marine brigades and divisions is that they are they're very effective forces. They really pack a punch. So yeah, once we militarily kind of pacify this region using a mixture of colonial fortresses and anti-insurgency sort of sorties, then we can economically exploit the region with merchants and trade stations. So that's going to be the plan with Aden, and Hejaz will be a sort of later consideration. We are spending a small amount of money to just increase our colonial penetration of Hejaz. I think average penetration of Hejaz is about 43, something like that. So we're still some way away from it being a place that we can sort of... so average colonial penetration is 41. There are no second colonial powers here. I don't think there are any other powers that are especially interested in Hejaz. Average penetration is 56 in Libya. Of course, we will never forget that in August and September last year, we failed in our bid to colonize Libya. So Libya is the priority. Libya is the priority because it has the capacity to be a real running sore. We kind of already have the security apparatus in place in Libya. We already have colonial fortresses and, anchorages and harbours and this sort of thing. And we already have a significant amount of colonial penetration. The real concern with Libya now is that our colonial penetration atrophies on the basis of, for example, Prussian missions that are being set up. Foreign powers are taking an interest in the region. We can see here also that the Italians, or the Piedmont Sardinia, have sent colonial merchants, which is frankly quite irritating. Luckily those colonial merchants can't facilitate a trade station because we already basically have a monopoly on trade in Tripoli itself. But nevertheless, we want to keep a really careful eye on this, and I think once we raise the colonial penetration enough, and we're setting up a mission in Misrata, local chiefs, bribing of local chiefs in Sirte, also in Amal, and we're improving road networks in Cyrenaica and also Tripoli. Improving road networks is good because it increases our colonial penetration. Also regional loyalty as well. It means that these places are a little bit less likely to revolt against this. Average loyalty in Tripoli, for example, is 55% for us, but 45% loyalty to the rebels. Even once this becomes a colony, which means that these territories are much less likely to revolt, we're still going to have incursions from the south, of course, until the hinterland, until such a time as we're able to explore this region, which will happen in years to come, and then begin to move south and pacify the interior, which will happen at some point. So the priority in 1851 in terms of sort of military matters and sort of colonial matters is going to be achieving colonial status for Libya, and then hot on the heels from that, achieve enough colonial penetration to get Yemen converted into a protectorate. And also looking at these regions becoming protectorates as well, Qatar, Dubai, and Bahrain. We have pretty significant colonial penetration, which is going to continuously climb. So 25, 24, and then 30. So we're not too far off being able to convert these regions into protectorates. That's pretty much in terms of military reports. There's not a huge amount more to report, I don't think. Economically, things are getting exciting now. I mean, I mentioned in the last report that we do have a number of RGOs that are being built, some of which have been completed. So in Constantinople, we've completed a fisherman's port and cereal farm. We have completed our first tobacco field, and this is a qualitative step really since September. If we go to our assets balance, we can now see that we are producing tobacco, a very small amount of tobacco. We only have one tobacco plantation open. We have a number of others being constructed. But this is an exciting development for us. If we go to our Ministry of Industry and Commerce, we can see that we're building, we're manufacturing 1 unit of tobacco, and we're selling 1 unit on a national market. So anything that we're producing at the moment, we're selling. However, in addition to the one that we're producing in Adrianople, we have tobacco fields opening up in Salonika, Thrakia, and Constantinople, which in the next 6 months, I would say, will increase that production significantly. I think probably by the end of summer 1851, we're going to be looking at 4. We're going to be looking at producing 6 units of tobacco every fortnight, which is pretty reasonable, pretty significant. And once we develop railroad capacity, especially in Istanbul and Adrianople, that will dramatically increase that productivity. One of the reasons that tobacco is particularly special, I think, here, is that there is no craftsman production of tobacco. There is no kind of guild-based economy that produces tobacco. This is something that we have exploited on our own backs. We're developing this. This is a purely capitalist enterprise. And once we're producing 6 per fortnight, that's going to allow us to enter the export market for tobacco. And there is a serious export market for tobacco. We can see that Chesapeake Bay, South Brazil, and the Caribbean have a constant source of pretty much the same amount every fortnight, but the demand for imports from these regions is much higher than these regions can provide for. So this is going to be a consistent source of exports for us. We do have the technological capacity to build our first kind of industrial sites. The first is textile shops. This requires a lot more manufactured goods than we have. The real bottleneck for anything at the moment is manufactured goods. We're importing what we can to supplement our small amount of indigenous or domestic production, but we're some way off being able to produce textiles. The good thing with textiles is it certainly is a a form of manufacturing that we can really get into. The reason being is we have a really, really good domestic access to both dyes and also wool and cotton, both from our craftsmen, but also RGOs. We actually have, I think, some of the only small capitalist enterprises we have at the beginning of this period in 1850 is dyes. We have a couple of dye farms. They can't be called farms. I wonder what they're called. I wonder what a dye. I think they're produced in Syria. What are they called? Dye quarry. Okay, dye quarry. I did not know that. I have no idea where dyes come from or how they're made. Okay, so but we actually have a couple of dye quarries, and we do have craftsman production of dyes. In fact, our crafts production of dyes is significantly more than our capitalist production of dyes, but we do have a couple of enterprises. In fact, one in Lebanon, one in Syria, and we have further kind of capacity to develop this commodity more. So yeah, we would be able to actually support a pretty substantial textile production in the Ottoman Empire, which is definitely something we're going to be considering doing. So yeah, a promising start to the year economically, or a promising first year economically. In fact, when we look at the production of cereals, all of our cereal farms that we started manufacturing are actually open. We're producing 9 units of cereals per fortnight, and in addition to that, 14 background production from our craftsmen. So our capitalist production of cereals is kind of etching closer now to kind of eclipsing our guild production. The capitalist production of fish is 6. 8 craftsman production, but we're actually opening up a number of additional fishing ports in Smyrna, Sinop, Thessaloniki. So we're going to be looking at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 units of fish per fortnight very, very soon. I have extended our kind of RGO development to Sinop. So yeah, a really, really exciting start. We're beginning to develop the technological capacity now to actually build some manufactories. We certainly don't have the Industrial Revolution yet. That is actually a qualitative technology, which we will have soon. Percussion cap muskets is something I'm keeping a really careful eye on. There are a couple of technologies that are sort of they represent qualitative changes. A lot of these technologies, they don't really deliver anything sort of concrete, but they're kind of stepping stone technologies. So we look at bilateral trade treaties. This leads on to trademark protection, copyright protection, and so on and so forth. And as we work through these, they begin to offer sort of certain kinds of qualitative changes. There are a lot of technologies. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands, of technologies, all of which are kind of interlinked. One feature of our armed forces at the moment is, even though it is in pretty good shape, if, for example, we take an army corps and then we click on one of the elements, we can see that our equipment is 1840 to 1850. This is the kind of period equipment that we have, and we can see that we're in 1851. And if we look at our technology and Academy of Sciences, we go back to percussion cap muskets. So this adds a total of 28 new units to the force pool. What this really does is simply replace all of the units that we can build with a slightly newer variety. This newer variety will provide us with a slightly different picture, representing the different kind of fashions, the slight modifications to uniform that happen over time, and eventually by the time we get to the beginning of the 20th century, these uniforms will be khaki and this sort of thing. But the real change, of course, are the combat values, and that comes from the weapons that the soldiers carry. So percussion cap muskets is a qualitative step that we need to take. I'm keeping a careful eye on it. It's climbing quite quickly now. It will climb quite quickly because most of our neighbours will have access to this technology. So it's something that we do want to keep a kind of careful eye on. We could actually spend state revenue. It'd be 50 per turn, so per fortnight. It'd be very expensive, and we would do this. If we did this, we would not be able to consider colonising Libya next year, and it would increase this by a very small amount. And to tell you the truth, I don't think it would be enough at this stage. Once we're really swimming in money, once we have a huge amount of state revenue coming in, and state revenue will come in on the basis of a large capitalist economy. Once we have a large capitalist economy, like places like Smyrna, Constantinople, Ankara, these cities will begin to grow. Our tax revenue will dramatically increase. Different kinds of technologies also will allow us to collect different kinds of taxes. So, for example, income tax, which doesn't exist at this time. But when we start importing and exporting a lot more goods, maritime tariff taxes will dramatically increase. So it's on the basis of a robust and powerful growing economy that our tax revenue is going to dramatically increase. And our tax revenue, of course, is going to be supplemented by this trickle of diamonds or gems from our colonial sort of trade holdings in Dubai, Qatar and Bahrain, and also Kuwait. Actually, Kuwait also produces diamonds, and some of these will be converted into state revenue. So I'm thinking at this stage we don't collect enough tax revenue. Our state doesn't make enough money to consider trying to accelerate a particular technology. But it is going to be a consideration for the future once we have much more money. So military matters, that's over. There's not much else to report economically. I think the plan for this year economically is, now, all of the cereal farms I think that we intend to open, most of which are in the Balkans. We should say that we fully intend to keep these territories. We're not planning to sacrifice these territories. I think at most we would consider, if Austria went to war very early on, we might consider having to give sort of Bosnia-Herzegovina over to Austria, because we would be hard-pressed to defend it or take it back. We would have to deliver a pretty sensational and long odds victory over Austria. And Austria early on has a much more developed industrial economy. It's going to collect a lot more tax revenue, and this would notice in a protracted war against Austria, this kind of economic disadvantage. Even if we did very well early on, we would sort of be attritioned, I think. So Bosnia-Herzegovina, I think, is the only territory that's on the cards, and we would absolutely look to take that back late game, in the sort of maybe the later decades of this century, if we were to lose that. But these regions, Bulgaria, southern Serbia, are really important for indigenous access to coal. We do have a large amount of coal stockpiled now. We could also look at actually exploiting the Romanian economy, which has good domestic access to coal, and also perhaps building cereals farms in Serbia and Montenegro at some point. But we're going to continue trying to expand our tobacco production as well. We have a capacity to build 2 tobacco plantations in Plevna, which we haven't even considered yet. We're sort of not there yet. And also, I think in the next year, we're going to focus on expanding probably production of fish and fruits. And I think the next step now, we've spent a lot of investment really in our Balkan provinces, and that is important. But we're going to start considering sort of Western Anatolia now. So we're going to be looking at this an opium plantation, I suppose a poppy field, wouldn't it? We're going to be developing a poppy field, opium production in Bursa, fruits in Izmit, and I think our fishing port is going to be, our fishing sort of capacity is going to be reached actually probably in the next fortnight in Smyrna. At the moment, we produce so much sort of craftsman production of wool that I don't think this is going to be worth exploiting. At some point, this will be worth exploiting, not least because once we have railroads and a higher level of productive efficiency, these kind of wool roundels, once they're exploited, once we get kind of wool farms in these regions, this doesn't just produce wool, it also produces cattle as a kind of a byproduct of these farms, which is something that's quite important. Now, there are other areas that we can produce cattle, but nevertheless, that's something that's worth considering. So we're going to look at maybe in the next year to 2 years, beginning to open up coal mines in Ankara, possibly Zanguldak. Apologies for my terrible pronunciation. And in any case, focusing more on development in Western Anatolia. And in terms of colonial, I've kind of already gone over that. The absolute priority is going to be the colonization of Libya. And we're going to hope to have this achieved by the end of summer, I think, by sort of September Business Report 1851. We're going to hope that at least the process of colonization in Libya is well underway, and we're going to make sure that we achieve a higher enough level of colonial penetration to ensure that this time there are no foul ups, and we get sort of Libya in the bag. And then as a second kind of as a sort of second priority, we're going to look to kind of militarily pacify Aden. We don't want to use large amounts of forces here, but we're going to keep we're going to basically start building a base in Aden. Aden is actually the colonial capital region of Yemen, even though Sana'a is, I think, probably the most populous location. Aden is actually the key place that we need to focus on developing. I think that's it. As a very kind of broad appraisal of the first year, I think, as I said to begin with, we've got our military deployment set. We have our main Imperial Army set in Adrianople. One of the reasons I don't feel too sort of bad, actually, about having Khurshid's cavalry division in the south and not located in Syria or Palestine, is it occurred to me, in the event of any kind of insurgency or problems here, we can actually very, very quickly deploy Omar Pasha's cavalry division based in Smyrna by simply using riverine points. In fact, it would take him less than a fortnight to make land in either Lebanon or Palestine. So in the event of any kind of rebellion here, it would be very, very difficult it would be very easy rather for us to kind of make some kind of maneuvers there. In the east, we do need to at some point consider sort of firming up Abdi Pasha's force. This is only one infantry corps. I mean, this is sort of just under 30,000 men. This is not really a very large force. Now, if Russia were to station a significant army in the southern Caucasus and sort of make a move on Kars, we would be very hard pressed to hold any kind of significant Russian force. Even though this is quite mountainous terrain and this does offer us some sort of significant defense advantages, I think we would need more than 30,000 men. I think the Russians would likely move with something like 100,000 or more soldiers. So we definitely need to kind of build this force up a little bit. I think actually in the Balkans we're in pretty good shape. Rita Pasha's force in Adrianople, and then our kind of more mobile force under Abdul Karim and Sofia. I think I'll leave the video there. I think that's pretty much everything covered in terms of the activities of autumn last year. And our next business report will be March 1851. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.